There are people who seem destined for greatness, with a future full of promise, but their stories end in tragedy and despair. Imagine someone blessed by God, given everything in their hands. A person who was chosen to be a prince over God's people. Someone who had the kingdom ripped from the house of David and handed to them. And yet, after receiving all these blessings, this person ended up worse than those who came before him. A man who became so despised that God compared his descendants to a pile of manure. The man we're talking about is Jeroboam, the first king of the northern tribes of Israel. Jeroboam's story began with promise. He was a young man of talent, chosen for a great work. His story could have been one of glory, full of blessings from God. But instead, it became a warning. A tragedy. His name is synonymous with apostasy, disobedience, and divine judgment. In the Bible, Jeroboam is often seen as an example of how idolatry and rebellion against God can destroy not just a person, but an entire nation. But before we dive into his downfall, we need to understand his full story. Jeroboam was an Ephraimite from humble beginnings, the son of Nebat and Zeruiah. Ephraim was one of the most influential tribes in the north. Jeroboam grew up in an environment of hard work and dedication, and the Bible doesn't tell us much about his family, except that his mother was a widow, which suggests that he may have faced struggles early in life. Despite this, Jeroboam stood out as an adult for his diligence, his leadership, and his ability to get things done. King Solomon recognized Jeroboam's potential and appointed him as the overseer of the labor force from the house of Joseph, meaning Jeroboam was in charge of the workers from the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Everything was going well until one day, while Jeroboam was on his way out of Jerusalem, he was met by Ahijah, a prophet from Shiloh. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak, and when he saw Jeroboam, he tore the cloak into 12 pieces. He gave Jeroboam 10 pieces and kept 2 for himself. This dramatic act was a prophecy. The kingdom of Israel would be torn apart, and Jeroboam would rule over 10 tribes. News of Ahijah's prophecy reached Solomon, and the king, fearing rebellion, sought to kill Jeroboam. To escape Solomon's wrath, Jeroboam fled to Egypt, where he found refuge with Pharaoh. He remained there until Solomon's death. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam ascended to the throne. However, Rehoboam quickly found himself in trouble. The northern tribes were fed up with the heavy burdens Solomon had placed on them in his later years, especially the forced labor he used to build his kingdom. Jeroboam returned from Egypt to join the northern tribes in asking Rehoboam to ease their burdens. Rehoboam asked for 3 days to consider their request and sought advice from the elders who had served his father. The elders advised Rehoboam to be a servant to the people, to ease their burdens, and gain their loyalty. But Rehoboam ignored this advice. Instead, he listened to the young men he had grown up with. They advised him to increase the burdens on the people even more. Predictably, Rehoboam's harsh response led to an uprising. The northern tribes declared that they had no share in the house of David and broke away, leaving Rehoboam with only Judah and Benjamin. Jeroboam was crowned king over the northern tribes of Israel, and he established his reign with political and military might. Jeroboam set about fortifying key cities to protect his kingdom from potential invasions. Among these cities were Shechem, in the hills of Ephraim, which he initially made his capital, and Peniel, east of the Jordan. These fortifications were a clear sign that Jeroboam was preparing to defend his kingdom both from external threats and internal rebellions. Jeroboam established 2 centers of worship, one in Bethel and the other in Dan, deliberately diverting the people's worship away from Jerusalem. This was a direct violation of God's commandments, and it led the people of Israel into idolatry. Jeroboam not only created these idols but also appointed priests from all sorts of people, not just from the tribe of Levi, as God had commanded. He even instituted a festival in the 8th month to imitate the Festival of Tabernacles, further solidifying his illegitimate religious system. Despite the clear signs of God's displeasure, Jeroboam continued in his ways. God sent a prophet to Jeroboam, warning him of the destruction that would come. This prophet, known only as the man of God from Judah, prophesied against the altar that Jeroboam had built. He declared that a future king, Josiah, would desecrate the altar and destroy the false priests. As a sign, the altar split in 2, and the ashes spilled out. Jeroboam, in anger, stretched out his hand to seize the prophet, but his hand withered, and he could not pull it back. Terrified, Jeroboam asked the prophet to pray for him, and when the prophet prayed, his hand was restored. Yet even after this miraculous sign, Jeroboam refused to turn from his idolatry. God's judgment on Jeroboam was swift. His son Abijah fell gravely ill, and Jeroboam sent his wife in disguise to consult the prophet Ahijah. But God had already revealed her identity to the prophet, and Ahijah delivered a devastating message: Jeroboam's entire household would be wiped out because of his sins. His son would die as soon as his wife returned home, and the rest of Jeroboam's family would be left unburied, eaten by dogs in the city or birds in the field. A sign of complete disgrace. The story of Jeroboam is a powerful reminder of the consequences of disobedience and idolatry. Even though Jeroboam was given an incredible opportunity, his choices led to the ruin of not just his own dynasty, but the spiritual downfall of an entire nation. Jeroboam's life is a warning to all who seek power without submitting to God's will. Let us reflect on this. Are we following God's path, or are we letting our fears and desires lead us astray? The story of Jeroboam reminds us that the decisions we make, especially those related to our faithfulness to God, have lasting impacts not just on our lives but on those around us.